Dear friends, welcome once again to the joint ASHA Ganga Jamuni endeavor to present our past through a talk by a well known historian. Today, our guest speaker is someone who actually needs no formal introduction at all. Her works speak for her. She is none other than the author of various path breaking books on medieval Indian architecture, the Austrian scholar who knows more than any of us about our built heritage. I mean, Dr. Ebba Koch. If you haven't consulted her book, Mughal Architecture, an outline of its history and development, which was initially published in 1991, but then after that published by Oxford University Press in 2002, you have actually never understood Mughal architecture. It was published as a revised edition in 2013 by Primus Books. I, for one, never was formally a student of architectural history, having never offered it as a course in either my BA or MA. I acquired all my knowledge about the Mughal architecture from Dr. Koch's works. This book of hers and that of Catherine ASHA, whom we hosted earlier, made me realize what architectural history is all about. It is not merely a description of the heights or length of a building, but about why and how a particular type of building was constructed in a certain period. Another of her fantastic book which influenced me was Mughal Art and Imperial Ideology, which was once again published by Oxford University Press in 2001. Incidentally, I came to read it only after Dr. Koch presented a copy of it by her own hands while on one of her numerous visits to Aligarh. Actually, she had brought it for Irfan Saab, but not finding him in the department, she decided to gift it to me on the plea that I was the only one at Aligarh who was actually working on architecture. And she thought that I deserved it more than anyone else. Thank you, ma'am, for presenting me that book. The third book of hers, which I would like to name, is The Complete Taj, which got published in 2011, a remarkable volume through which one does not only comprehend the Taj Mahal, but almost the full riverfront city of Agra, along with most of its major monuments, Havelis, and gardens. Ebba Koch is not only a historian of architecture, but also a scholar who introduces us how to use the Mughal miniatures in order to understand our past. Her King of the World, the Patsha Nama, which is actually a rendition of the famous, Patshanama manuscript at Windsor Castle, introduces the illustrations, beautiful illustrations of Patshanama to the world. She has numerous papers and a number of other books to her credit. I am not naming all of them here. Some dealing with miniatures, others dealing with monuments, and many dealing with both. She is to Mughal architecture what her hero Shah Jahan was to the Taj. Today, she is here to speak on Agra as it was, the Garden of Jahanara, some new findings. Over to you, Dr. Koch. We are actually looking forward to hear what you have to tell us. Welcome, ma'am.
Welcome, Professor Rizvi, and welcome to all colleagues and friends who are listening. And I especially would like Professor Rizvi for this very kind introduction. and for inviting me to participate in this exciting venture of digital talks, which allows for a global simultaneousness in academic communication and demonstrates that the coronavirus has also its positive sides after all. In the previous talk, Supriya Gandhi has spoken about Darashuko, and I follow with an issue concerning his sister, the daughter of Shah Jahan, Princess Jahanara. When I discussed the subject of my talk here with Professor Rizvi, I proposed several topics, and we decided for an issue of microhistory, which is, however, more than a simple case study because it leads to larger questions. I'm going to talk about my recent research on the garden of Princess Jahanara at Agra, which relates to my very own archive, namely the documentation of Mughal architecture, and I conduct this research since the late 1970s. The study of the gardens forms part of my larger project dedicated to the palaces and gardens of Shah Jahan, which consists of a survey, documentation, and analysis of all the palaces. The Mughals, Shah Jahani sources call them Daulat Khana, and formal gardens called Bagh of this Mughal emperor. These gardens, which I have found in the sources and in the field, and to a certain extent, it includes also the residences of the imperial family and the nobility. Can we have the next slide? Yes. The project has two main pillars, namely the reading of the textual of sources, the chronicles and poetic works of Shah Jahan, and fieldwork carried out on the monument itself. My investigations seek to arrive what the cultural historian and anthropologist Clifford Geertz described as a thick description, in our case an analysis of the relationship between form, function, and symbolic meaning of Shah Jahani buildings. And I believe that such a synthetic approach helps to understand architecture and art as a means of communication, and like language and literature, they present vital insights to the study of the cultural, social, and political history of the period. Also, in the text, we observe, in Shah Jahan's time, we observe the emergence of rich texts on architecture which have no precedent in previous Mughal writing. They do, however, not form a genre on its own, because the Mughals had no written architectural theory. They did not take up the Indian tradition of the Shastras. What we do have are detailed descriptions which inform us about the construction, history, and function of a building, and they begin to appear after the accession of Shah Jahan in the official history, Tarikh, of the emperor. Now, these texts are not concerned with how to build correctly, which was an agenda of the Shastras, but they give an assessment of the status quo of a finished building and its use. The descriptions in Shah Jahan's history may also line out how a building will look like, a kind of project study, so to say. And this appearance of architecture in the official text, as in historiography, expresses a distinct interest of Shah Jahan, because he directed the close observation of the visual world of nature, which had been a concern of his ancestor Babur and his father Jahangir, to an assessment of his own artifacts namely his buildings. Also, the poets, especially Khalil, but also Qutzi and Kashi, wrote eulogies of Shah Jahan's buildings, which may even contain historical and factual information. And very often these are chronograms on the occasion of the completion of a building. Now, so my work focuses on the palaces of garden of Shah Jahan, as I mentioned. It was not possible to isolate his project from those of other members of the imperial family and those of his nobility, his amirs and mansabdar. Now here, the evidence is not readily available because while imperial projects were discussed in great detail in the imperial histories, non-imperial projects were as a rule only mentioned briefly. An exception are the architectural project of the favorite daughter of Shah Jahan, Princess Jahanara, which are described at least to a certain extent by the historians and poets of Shah Jahan. Now, the second pillar of my work is field research on the monument to document the buildings through measuring and photography. Now, this exercise, can we have the next slide? Takes one away from the desk into what can be at times quite rough environments, especially in the case of so far unrecorded buildings. But it is obviously essential for the architectural historian to establish the physical form of the buildings and their stylistic properties. Another aspect of field research is, of course, that it leads to an understanding of the living condition of the local population, and also one experiences how they, in their own situation, react to the monuments. Next slide, please. And it might lead to encounters with the wildlife of India, like here with this cobra I met and photographed in the fort of Dauladabad. So much said, I would like to add that I'm always a bit apprehensive to speak to historians and social historians about the technicalities of architecture, fearing that it might be beyond their range of interest. But on the other hand, it might be useful, I hope it might be useful, to have a glimpse at the conditions of how an archive, which consists of buildings, is established. Now, field research was especially relevant in the case of the Garden of Jahanara. Next slide, please. Because the histories mention it only briefly, and when I began my investigations at Agra in the 1970s, nothing of the garden was known. Not even its real name. It emerged in the course of my research that the Barhe Jahanara was a constituent element of the urban scheme of Mughal Agra, which consisted of gardens and garden residences of the elite on both banks of the river Yamuna, or Jamna as the Mughal called it. Actually, they called it Jaun. The historical importance of gardens, next slide please, has been summarized, I hope you can read this, anyway, I read it out to you, by the garden historian Pierre Grimals in his introduction to his book, The Roman Gardens, which he wrote in 1944. It is possible that an ingenious historian of a given period with only a knowledge of the gardens of the time might well recover its way of thinking and provide that thought with an image as exact as if he had known the number of corpses on a battlefield, or perhaps the number of provinces passed from one prince to another. And this would be a more exact image, and certainly one more lively and true, and with greater potential for revealing to us a world of sentiments and ideas, which we call a civilization. So such thoughts are highly relevant to understand the Mughals, because the garden was their first architectural expression in the Indian subcontinent. It reflects a love for nature as well as a nomad-inspired life in tents or open pavilions. Next slide, please. From the beginning, the garden of the Mughals fulfills diverse functions with a strong political and symbolic connotation. The garden served as a residence, as a module of planning of cities, later also as a module in the planning of palaces, and as a meaningful site for tombs and mausolea, and in the last analysis under Shah Jahan, as a political metaphor of the golden age generated by the good government of the great Mughal. At Agra, the Timurid concept of a formally planned garden at Jaharbagh was adapted to the riverfront situation. Next slide, please. And led to the creation of the waterfront as a module of the waterfront city. It had the form of a rectangle or square, enclosed on the three landward sides by walls, and the main building was not placed into the center of the garden, but on a terrace overlooking the river. It means that the garden component was on the landward side. Next slide, please. The riverfront gardens constituted the residences of the imperial family and the highest-ranking nobles. It means that the heart of a city had a suburban character, and the waterfront garden, or in this case the riverfront garden, represented the microscopic module of this urban landscape. Now, Agra began to lose its political importance when Shah Jahan moved his court to the newly built Shah Jahanabad in 1648, and when the riverfront was abandoned, the ruling elite, moved to with obviously with the court to Delhi, and Agra was taken over by the inhabitants of Agra, the riverfront gardens. And these gardens began to grow wild and served as recreational spots from where the waters of the river could be accessed for water sports and boating. After the British takeover in 1803, the gardens lining the bank of the river continued to disintegrate, and eventually the British became instrumental in the destruction of large parts of the riverfront scheme, because they constructed roads along the bank of the river and exploded the gardens. Next slide. The pressure of what is left of the riverfront garden scheme of Agra continues today with even greater force, because apart from the Taj Mahal and the fort, only the gardens and tombs of the upper left bank of the river on both sides of the tomb of Ibn-ud-Dawla survive today in anything like the state in which her former splendor can be appreciated. The next slide, please. The riverfront garden scheme of the city can, however, be reconstructed with the help of Mughal and European records, and the famous map enclosed in the Jaipur Palace Museum, which was prepared in the 1970s, and on which the names of the gardens are inscribed in Devanagari script. Next slide, please. So here you see the map. I wish I would have a pointer, but I hope you can make out the river and the gardens on both sides. I used this map as a base of the reconstruction of Mughal Agra, which, as Professor Rizvi has mentioned, was formed the first chapter of my book on the Taj Mahal. And this reconstruction, can we have the next slide? So you see here the numbering of the gardens. So the numbers are my own. And the Garden of Jahanara is number 4, which I hope you can see here. And the Red Fort is 28, and the Taj, I think, is 6, hopefully. No, 20, yeah. I think I should make this a little bigger, so then I can also see it better. So now,
Professor Koch, can you also tell us something about this particular map that the people would be interested in that?
In which?
I mean, the significance of this map.
This map was prepared in the 1720s, and it was in the course of the construction of Jaipur. And the Maharaja obviously developed interest in the famous Mughal sites and had his map of Agra prepared, and also maps of the forts and some of the gardens. So it's kept in the Jaipur Palace Museum today. Yeah. So now so I based my reconstruction on this map, and this was confirmed by a recent addition to the British Library collection. Can we have the next slide? Which is of crucial importance in recreating the appearance of what has been one of the great imperial cities of the world as it appeared in the early 19th century. So the manuscript, I hope you can see it. I will show you a detail later on it, just to give you an idea, of this panoramic scroll, which is 7.63 meters long and 32 centimeters wide. And it shows the river as a blank, straight path, where the buildings and gardens on either side are rendered in elevation, strung out along a straight base. So it does not show the large bend of the river. And above each building, inscriptions in English and Urdu, which two of which allow us to date the scroll approximately to the years between 1827 and 35. So, of these gardens which survive today, one of the best known and preserved gardens is the garden today known as Rambach. Can I have the next slide? But it emerged that it was, in fact, the garden of Jahangir's wife, Nur Jahan, called in the sources Bah-e-Nur Afshan, or the light scattering garden. The next garden to the south, can we have the next slide? Was and is still generally known as Sahara Bach or Sahra Bach, or also Sarah Bach, and is believed to have belonged to a daughter of Barbara. I have here the arrow to point it out, its situation next to the Rambach. But on the Jaipur maps, this garden is inscribed as, no, we can go back to the Jaipur map. Well, you can leave this also. But on the Jaipur maps, this garden is described as Bagh Jahanara, and also the British Library scroll map of Agra inscribes it. Now we can have the next slide. As Jahanara's garden, and in Persian as Bagh Jahanara Begum. The next slide, please. Is it not coming? Is the next slide? Oh, here it is, yeah. So we have Jahanara's garden in English, and in Persian Bagh Jahanara, and in Urdu also, also Jahanara Begum, Bete Shah Jahan Badshah, etc., which reads in translation the garden of Jahanara Begum. And Jahanara Begum was the daughter of Emperor Shah Jahan. It was constructed in the age of Shah Jahan. So, similarly, in records on Agra dating from the early 19th century, the garden features as Bagh Jahanara, which makes it clear that Sahara was a popular corruption of Jahanara, and that this was the garden of Shah Jahan's daughter, Princess Jahanara. Next slide, please. That's a fictional portrait of her. She was the eldest child of Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal, and especially after the death of her mother Mumtaz Mahal in 1631, Jahanara held a special place in her father's affections. She was entitled Begum Sahib and ran the emperor's household, and her garden was one of the largest on the Agra riverfront. Next slide, please. Thus, it does not surprise that Shah Jahan's court poet Abu Talib Kalim Kashani gave, next slide please, gave the garden special attention and special space in his praise poem on Agra, which he wrote in the 1630s. Can we have the next slide? Is it coming? Anyway, I start to read out the verses to you because I also have them on the slide. So several of his verses provide embedded in poetical, no? It should be the verses, the slide after Jahanara. I hope it's coming. No? Yeah, here it is. No, but one go. Yes. No, one back, please. It should come with two buildings. Anyway, yes, here it is. So now Kalim, in his verses, provides embedded in poetic metaphors unique historical information about the original architecture, the plantation, and the founder. By the way, this is a speciality of Kalim because he's the only one who tells us in his uncompleted Bachanama about the foundation of the Taj Mahal, which were constructed by means of well sunk into the river at the riverbank of the Jamna. Now, the poem of Kalim, the passages which relate to Jahanara's garden are as follows. A boat trip will remove the sorrow from your heart, pass by the garden of Jahanara. In this paradise is an alluring palace that the sight gets impatient to behold it. On three of its sides is a flower garden, and in front there is a river, every wave of which is the curl of a delightful ringlet. Its walls and doors are painted to look like flower beds, and there one should sit inside, facing the wall. So one shouldn't look outside because the paintings are so beautiful, but look inside to the painted garden. In that garden is a great pond full of the water of life, whose waves do not know its shore because it's so big. And the laying of this flower garden and this sublime palace was done by Her Majesty, the chosen one of our age, Mumtaz Doran, meaning Mumtaz Mahal, the exalted lady. Chaste as an angel and of the character of Bilqis, namely the Queen of Sheba, she was pure in her heart like the Virgin Mary. She was so distinguished among the people of the world that she became the spouse of Shah Jahan. And that very paradise which she had made to flourish, she gave, I left out one line here, when the exalted lady of the world, the Bilqis of the age, went to paradise from the assembly of Shah Jahan, I did not leave it out, though, that very paradise which she had made to flourish, namely the garden, she gave to her own world-adorning child. So that's a play on the name Jahanara, which means world adornment. The eldest beloved daughter of the king, the exalted veiled lady, the cherished reminder of Her Majesty the Queen. End of quote. So this description confirms that the layout of the garden followed the riverfront design, namely with a building overlooking the water and on three sides of it, of the garden of the building flower beds on the landward side. It also tells us that the garden was not founded by Jahanara, but by her mother Mumtaz Mahal, and incidentally, it is the only architectural foundation which can be connected to her patronage. After her death in 1631, the garden passed to her daughter Jahanara, who turned her inheritance into the most splendid garden palace of Agra, which was praised by the poets. The garden was not only frequented by the imperial family, but Shah Jahan received here also the court and foreign dignitaries, so he used it in an official manner also. And in May 1638, the emperor invited the Persian ambassador Yadgar Beg to the Bahi Jahanara, took a walk with him, and in the evening ordered illuminations and fireworks, which were displayed on the bank of the Yamuna below the main riverfront pavilion, which is called Imarat. Prince Aurangzeb, who was visiting his sister when he came to Agra in 1652 to inspect the condition of the Taj Mahal, was visiting her in this very garden. Now, the next slide, please. The recently discovered Agra scroll gives us the best and actually the only true picture of the garden as it presented itself when seen from the river in the early 19th century. It was then in the late 1820s, still well preserved, and shows the typical elevation of an Agra riverfront garden with a terrace running along the river, in the center of which stands the main building. It is flanked on both sides by a tower pavilion called Burj, which formed the endpoint of an enclosure wall which framed the garden on its landward side. The earlier construction phase, next slide please, can be seen in the uncusped arches of the, next page, to the towers. We need the towers. Yes, here. So you can see here the lower openings unclasped, and the top chapri, this little kiosk, shows the cusped arches which are characteristic then for the architecture of Shah Jahan. So it means that Jahanara added a chhatri to this tower. And next slide, please. Now, of the two towers, which you see here on these slides, only the southern one survives. And the large pavilion fronting the river has now gone, so that the scrolls evidence is of greatest importance in revealing how the building looked like. We note that the facade displays bilateral symmetry on both sides of a central arch. Such a scheme is called Karina in the sources of Shah Jahan, which can here be translated as counter image. It was a favored design in his reign for architecture as well as for painting. And this central accentuation is reinforced by three arches in the center of the Darkhana. These are the chambers in the substructure below, and brackets supporting the vanished chacha or heavy eave above each of the two stories still survive in this drawing. And next slide, please. And some of this, if you look closely, is also visible in a photograph taken by John Murray in circa 1860. So at this time, this was still left of the riverfront pavilion. But in the early 20th century, the grounds of the gardens were rented out by the government to local nurseries, which left its trees and bushes largely to grow wild. And thus, today, next slide, please, the Bahe Jahanara appears somehow, like at least in parts, when I saw it last in 2017, like a romantic English landscape gardens with the Mughal ruins in it like follies. Now, the garden is not protected by the Archaeological Survey of India, and its surviving Mughal substance is increasingly built over and obliterated by unregulated construction. So we can have the next slide, please. You see it here, a view from the roof of the, and here a view towards a later little temple built near the river. And the next slide, please. So this is one of the colonies which have been built inside the garden. So it means that the surviving Mughal substance is increasingly built over and obliterated by this new unregulated construction, and the bridge of the bypass of the National Highway number 2 cuts in between the Rambagh or Bahe Nur Shan and the Sahara Bagh or Bahe Jahanara. Next slide, please. So I took this photo when the bridge was built. This was in 1991, but in the meantime, it has been even widened. Next slide, please. So, and for another lane, so this is how it looked like in 2016. And down below, on the right side, would be the garden. Next slide, please. So the original dimensions of the gardens of the garden have not been recorded, and so far only a sketch plan of its layout has been published, which was based on the sketch plan of the British archaeologist Carlyle, who surveyed the garden in 1871. According to this survey and his measurements, the garden covered an area of about 386 by 334 meters, or 1,266.4 by 1,095 feet. It was such even larger than the Jaharbach Park, the Jaharbach part of the garden of the Taj Mahal. I mean the square part of the garden of the Taj Mahal was really large. And Carlyle also recorded several features which have since then disappeared. He mentions the enclosure walls, an octagonal tank on the northeast corner, which you see in the upper left. Then the foundations of a gate, which you see on top in the center. And the main walkway, which was accentuated by platforms and which contained sunk pools, and which ran down from the gate over a distance of 334 meters to the riverfront pavilion. Now, according to the waterfront scheme, this pavilion was the main building of the garden. We have seen it on the earlier drawing. It stood on a raised platform with substructures, and steps led down to a platform. Next slide, please. To a landing platform. A landing platform, it was for boats at the bank of the river. Now, the remains of the individual buildings have never been surveyed. And with architect Richard Barrault, who works with me since 1982 on the survey of the buildings of Shah Jahan and other Mughal buildings, so we carried out a new survey in several field expeditions beginning in February 2001, March 2003, then another field work expedition in July 2014 and September 2015, and finally in March, May, and July 2017. So this is what we found. Next slide. Of the riverfront terrace, only parts remain. Part of the foundation is of the landing, which was based on cylindrical wells. I hope you can see them here. Can I? No, I can. You have a wall running along the river, and it ends into a round element. So this would be wells which were sunk into the terrain of the river to consolidate the foundations. And we have similar foundations in the Taj Mahal, and they were described by Kalim, how this was constructed. So then next slide, we have a modern set of steps called the Sri Ram Ghat, This has been added to the terrace by a private patron, and the main garden building, which stood in the center of the terrace and which we see on the Agra scroll and on Mary's photograph, has been built over by a modern temple, the Mangaleshwar Mandir. Next slide, please. So you see here on the right side at the background this new building. On the left side, the photograph of Mary, and on top the plan with the building in the center of the riverfront. The most splendid remain of the garden is the southwest tower. Can you next slide, please? Which formed the end of the southern garden wall. Part of the northern wall of the garden also survives, and along its axis, a ruined hammam, a bathhouse close to one of the pillars of the modern bridge. Next slide. Further remains of the Mughal period were a raised water channel supported by a wall fortified by arches, along which what seems to have been the southern enclosure wall. And next slide, please. Two red sandstone chhatris in the interior of the garden. One of them has been converted into a Hindu shrine. The most noteworthy remains of the gardens are the hammam and the southwest corner tower. Plan, please. So I hope you can make out the plan. It's this little black square on the left side on the wall, which runs down until the back corner of the garden. So it's near the front tower, leant inwards. A little black rectangle, rather. So now this is how the hammam looks today. Next slide, please. So now we have, we didn't have we didn't, okay, next one, please. This is a chhatri. Next one, please. Yeah, after the chhatri is a plan. Okay, here it is. So the black rectangle on the left side, a bit leant inwards from the corner tower, is the position of the hammam. So this hammam is, as I mentioned, unpublished and not even mentioned in any descriptions of the garden. Next slide, please. It's unpublished, and today, so the ruin, as I said, it's unpublished, and the ruin structure is today occupied by the family who integrated it into a complex they built under the bridge. They use it as a living space and as a dairy farm they run here. The buffaloes are kept in an enclosure attached to the hammam, and the ruined building is patched up in places and serves as a storeroom and to dry laundry. Next slide, please. So the hammam, that's a view into the interior. So it's a rectangular structure, and the plan consists of the typical units of a Shahjahani bathhouse, about which the emperor's historian Abdul Hamid Lahori informs us in his description of the hammam, the great imperial hammam of the Agra fort. So he mentions, can we have the next slide? He mentions a Racht Khan, a disrobing room, a garam khana, a hot room, and a sard khana, a cold room. So this right on the left, you would see a heating chamber. Then comes the garam khana, the hot room. Then comes the cold room next to it. Then you have a corridor cutting through the building, and on the right side were latrines, presumably, and the Rachtkammer, the disrobing room. Next slide. So, in this hammam of the Princess Jahanara, the individual units are lined up on the east-west axis, beginning at the west with a narrow oblong I explained it earlier too. Wait, anyway, I think I mentioned it already, or perhaps we do it again, then it will be clearer. Can we go, or you can see it here on the right side on top. So we have first, we have this heating chamber, and then the garam khana, which is a square, a dome chamber, then follows the sard khana, the cool room. Thank you. Yeah, and separated from it by a traversal corridor, 2 more rooms. So now the next one. Yeah, here you see Richard Barrault, who is, no, go back. The slide was good, yeah. Anyway, I wanted to show, no, one more back. One more back, yeah. Yes, Richard. So, he is holding our field book in which we are inscribing the measurements of the building. And next one is that's a corridor which runs through the building, and then on the left side would be the rooms which we reconstructed with dotted lines because at this part of the building is missing. Now the hot room would have had a double floor, which a hypocaust heating system, and this is also missing. And the vault, next slide, one can still make out, part of the original decorative net pattern, which was called Kalibkari, which preserved in fragments on the left side within the arch. It forms kite-shaped, facets, and with networking pattern inserted in them. And this was done with a coat of chunam. This is polished stucco of lime plaster, which the forms were pressed into the wet plaster. And splendid expressions of this type of vault are found in the Taj Mahal. I have inserted a drawing of the vault of the gate of the Taj Mahal, where you can see this type of decorative pattern quite clearly. So such features, even when a building is in ruin, but it allows you to date a building by comparing it to related forms. Then, yeah, here's another detail of the vault. Next slide. And the next one. The best preserved structure of the garden and a splendid example of the garden tower pavilions of Agra is the southwestern corner tower, which transforms a building type derived from fortificatory architecture into a pleasure house. The shape of the tower is based on a two-storied regular octagon, which is crowned by a double-storied chhatri. Now, towers or burj had in Islamic architecture as a quote, indispensable accessories of princely buildings, end of quote, always a potential for residential use. In this corner tower, the pavilion character is heightened by a triangular extension which fills the corner between the riverfront and the terrace, and it contains also vaulted chamber. On its north side is a circular well. The whole unit can thus be described as tower well pavilion, if you so wish. Variations of the theme of the wall tower as a residential tower survive in other examples at Agra, dating from the first third of the 17th century. Next slide, please. Such as the Batiskamba, so-called Batiskamba of the Bulangbach, which dates from Jahangir's period. And the river, next slide, please. And the riverside towers of the Chinika Rausa and the garden next to it. And we also find them in the Agra fort, and also the towers of the Taj Mahal belong to this building type as well. Next slide. So this gives an impression of the riverfront towers which framed the garden buildings on this painting of the 17th century. Next slide, please. The brick construction of the tower is hidden behind a revetment of red sandstone carved with decorative motifs which are typical of the first decades of the 17th century. Yeah, here on this slide you see a bit more of the tower and also a view into the hall, the central room of the main floor, which would be the floor in the middle between the ground floor and the chhatri, which you see on the left slide. So also here we have this type of wall decoration, this kalibkari. On this floor, which can be described as a piano nobile, so the main floor, the decoration is particularly elaborate. Next slide, please. We see here, if the next slide comes, we see here shallow multicast niches of a peculiar constructed shape, which house vessels in relief. You see this on top, such as bottles or flower vases. Now, in its functional form, with actual niches conceived to house real vessels, this motif is called Chinikhana, also which means China house or China by the historians of Shah Jahan. Such registers of niches were a favorite wall decoration in Mughal, also in Iranian buildings, and they also appear often in pavilions of paintings. And coexisting with the functional form are purely decorative versions, as we see them here in the Tower of Jahanara. Next slide, please. So either in relief or in inlay work. So on the left side is a building of Agra at Sikandra, the Suraj Bankarbach, and on the right side a view into the so-called Jahangiri Mahal of the Agra fort, which is a bit earlier, yeah, from the 1570s probably. So this is a real form, yeah, which you see on the right side of Akbari architecture, and these decorative forms became next to the real form became popular in the architecture of Jahangir, and that they appear here is a further support of the building in the late 1620s. So then can we have this next slide? Which shows us these niches as a popular motif in Mughal painting. In the first century, the tower of the Jahanara Bagh was known as Kushag-e Said, the pavilion of the Said, from which people used to dive into the river. And also the British traveler Fanny Parks knew the garden in 1835 as Ziud Said Bagh and felt that with its red sandstone pavilion at the riverfront, it was much finer than the Rambach. Now, the Bagh Jahanara, to conclude, is a precious survivor of the Mughal gardens of the city of Mughal Agra as a garden city, which keeps some of its garden character alive in the 21st century. So it was a dismay for me to learn in November 2014, during our field research, to learn from a gardener that the leases of the nurseries, which were running out after 100 years, next slide please, which means that the future of the site is uncertain. Already more residential colonies have started to come up in the garden, and sadly the southwest corner tower serves as a latrine. My entreaties to the Archaeological Survey of India and to the Ministry of Culture to make the garden a protected monument remained so far without success, and the documentation which I presented here provides at least a record of what remained of the garden of Shah Jahan's queen Mumtaz Mahal and her daughter Princess Jahanara in the first two decades of the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koch. I mean, I really am grateful to you that you picked up this theme. The map of Agra, which is there in Jaipur, is actually very, very remarkable and informative as far as these riverfront gardens are concerned. Uh, I don't know whether uh, this garden in that map is mentioned as Bagh Patisahi or as Bagh Jahanara. I'm not sure. I mean, you would be able to tell us more about it. But before you answer that, I would want to put up uh, the questions which have been asked by our participants to you. Now, the first question, uh, you may probably be able to see it on your screen. Uh, uh, Ali Heather has asked this question. Ma'am, can you tell us about charity works done by Princess Jahanara and why she died unmarried.
I didn't get the last by she.
Why she died unmarried without marrying.
Oh, yeah, no, obviously it was a problem, for the princesses. It would have been a problem regarding, the power structure of the Mughal court, because the husband of a princess could have possibly made claims, and so it's interesting that all the daughters of Shah Jahan remained unmarried. No? It was obviously to keep the power centralized and not to nurture any possible pretenders. Yeah, and I mean, Jahanara was a very important and wealthy person. She inherited the estate of her mother Mumtaz Mahal. She was a trader. Yeah, she had ships running from Surat, which I mean, the Mughals as traders are also not generally known. And also, she, after the death of Mumtaz Mahal, she became the first lady of the harem and would also arrange marriages for young women and takes care of such aspects. And then, obviously, the gardens were not her only a form of architectural patronage, because we know that she had a large garden, a hammam, and a caravanserai in Delhi along the Chandni Chowk. So obviously, charities would have been part of her task, let's say, in this position.
Right. There is a question uh, by Professor Manvendra Kumar Pundhir. Professor Pundhir teaches at Aligarh, and he
Yeah.
has also been working on Agra. He has a project in which he is trying to survey the lesser known monuments of Agra.
Yeah.
Now he has this question, ma'am. Whatever you extracted from the newly discovered role,
Yeah.
have you ever attempted to substantiate it archaeologically, especially the central pavilion? Secondly, what's your perception about Corner Tower if I say that it represents the evolution of Mughal architecture from Akbar to Shah Jahan, with each story depicting the architectural development which took place during the reign of each emperor?
So, now,
These are
yeah,
two questions.
what I
Yeah.
have to, from the role, what I have tried to, I mean, to substantiate with my field research, I think I have sort of explained it, hopefully, in my talk. For the Garden of Jahanara, but obviously before the panoramic scroll was known, I based my investigations on a survey on both sides of the river and on the Jaipur map, yeah, and then records, British records, and whatever could be found in the Mughal sources. So the development of the garden tower, yeah, I mean, obviously we get some those which are preserved mainly date from the period of Jahangir. This would be the Patiskamba and then and Shah Jahan. We observe, yeah, an increasing, trend to ornamentation of the towers, to really create them like palace buildings, or like we have seen here in this very prestigious form of decoration with the chinikhana, and also the interior walls are obviously not very well preserved, but show this intention to make a palatial building of it, or a pavilion, a courtly pavilion. So originally, as I said, these were, the towers have a fortificatory origin, but then they get more and more intricate. And in the Taj Mahal, one of the corner towers even houses a well, that's the one to the south of the mosque. So towers can do many things in the later periods.
But I mean, the question which probably he has in mind is that one
Yeah,
of the corner towers is actually not purely Shah Jahani, but it evolved over a period of time.
yeah, right. We have
And he
at
finds
least
it that the original structure was Akbar and then built by Jahangir and then by Shah Jahan. So
which
what's the theory
which
actually?
structure was built by Akbar?
I mean, that is what he's asking. He says one of the towers has
Was
an evolutionary character.
of the Jahanara garden, or I'm not sure whether
Possibly
I
that.
understand the question correctly, because this garden shows no traces of Akbar's period. Yeah,
Fine, fine.
what we have some remains. At least I think the lower stories of the tower would date from Jahangir's period. I mean, it was built. It would have been built in the late 1620s, earliest, and or, or even, and then on top, I think the top floor, which shows this characteristic engraved arches, would have been added when the garden came to Jahanara, and she remodeled all the garden buildings, because also the hammam dates certainly from Shah Jahan's reign. It shows a characteristic alignment, on one axis of all the rooms, and this form of pattern of vault, which became very popular in Shah Jahan's building. So basically, to answer the question, I don't see anything Akbari in it. Tower, the lowest stories of the towers could date from Jahangir's period. And we must also keep in mind that it would have been a building of the late 1620s. So the style does not change abruptly from one reign to the other. Even in the tomb of Firoz Khan at Agra, which probably dates from Shah Jahan's period, you still have this ornamentation with his Chini Khane. But in Shah Jahan's period, the Chini Khane becomes more abstract. It becomes just a relief without later in his reign, without vessels in it. But then we have a revival of the real form in the Jaroka, in the Agra fort, where we have real niches decorating the walls.
Right.
So,
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question by Dr. Sayyid Ali Kazim.
yeah,
Uh, as long as Mullah Shah Badakhshi was alive, especially before the War of Succession,
yeah.
we have reference of both of them laying out garden or renaming or naming them after each other. Did this trend remain same after the War of Succession, keeping in view the fact that Jahanara survived more than 1.5 decade after the death of Shah Jahan as the first lady of the empire?
Yeah, we have evidence of Mullah Shah Badakhshi and Jahanara, and also her brother Dara Shukor, building gardens at Kashmir. So I even have, I think I have, this was like a little team, designing buildings. And in the new book of Samir Hamdani, more material of this activity will come to light, is going to be published. Yeah, but obviously after the War of Successions and Mullah Shah Badakhshi's powers were waning, so and also, I mean, Jahanara didn't have the power to sponsor buildings anymore. So it was obviously limited to the time before.
Right. There's another question. There's a second question by Dr. Ali Kazim. Being the author of two books, Munisul Arwah and Sahabiya, can we decipher categorical Sufistic Khankahi influence on the gardens being laid out by Jahanara?
Naja, the patronage of Jahanara is obviously linked to her being also a Sufi. So we have two very interesting personas, if you so wish, in Jahanara. On the one hand, she is a princess of the empire who sponsors the Jami Masjid at Agra, the official mosque on the other of Agra. And on the other hand, she sponsors with Mullah or builds for Mullah Shah Badakhshi the mosque of Mullah Shah in Kashmir on the Hari Babat, which shows a completely different style. Because the Agra mosque is in the tradition of mainstream formal Mughal architecture, while the Mullah Shah mosque shows very interesting references to the local architecture of Kashmir, even to pre-Islamic buildings. And also it's covered by inscriptions, poetic inscriptions, which is a very unusual feature. So we have differences in the patronage according in which which facet of Jahanara we are
exactly.
encountering.
Right, fine. There is another question by Ali Haider, Mr. Ali Haider.
Yeah.
He wants to know, do we find Islamic paradise like themes in the gardens of Jahanara as we find them at the Taj Mahal? He's asking about whether the garden also contains Sufi themes of Abdul Arabi and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a different case because the Taj is a funerary garden, which obviously has a different symbolism than a residential garden. Like we know only residential gardens of Jahanara too. So, paradise in a way is always implied, especially in the poetry. When about a garden is spoken, but how it reflects in the actual architecture is more difficult to say because some literary convention have a tradition on their own. So a garden would perhaps be described as a paradise, but it doesn't show these features which we associate with paradise, like this four-part form and with the four channels running through. So I think this is what one has to understand. On the one hand, we have the literary convention, and on the other hand, we have the actual architecture. And sometimes the two do not really meet, but exist on different planes.
Another question by Mr. Lakshmi Kant Mishra.
Yeah.
Mishra asks, your articulation of historiography is fascinating, but what would be your suggestions to the young scholars for undertaking research on such micro level topics?
No, yeah, I mean, micro level topics are obviously very important for establishing, the base of what you're talking about, because obviously we live now in times when academic in the academic discussion, theory has become very strong, and but then sometimes it gets very, yeah, theoretical. And but in order to know what we are talking about, we have to establish the facts. Thus, I think it's very important to, speaking of architecture, to establish the form of the building, and then, sort of approaches with more theoretical questions. So I think I mean, obviously, this has to do with archaeology too. So if you are a historian with no formation in archaeology, then the theoretical sort of realm is more easier for you to approach. It's just a different discipline, but I try to take a syncretistic approach or synthetic approach and bring the two together. So what would I advise someone? Yeah, he would have to start. It really depends, what the interests are. And you have seen the working conditions in the field are not always easy. Yeah, you have to face rough surroundings, and also to face people who live in the buildings. So it's work far away from the desk. So what would I advise? It depends. You should follow your inclination. what what appeals to you more? Yeah.
Well, now I'll take a question by Ms. Lubna Irfan. She
Okay.
teaches at Aligarh. Thank you, ma'am, for the lecture. I would like to ask about the nature of accessibility to these gardens. How much was publicly accessible?
At the time, yeah. I mean, obviously, some of the gardens were thrown open to the public, like the garden of the Khanechanan in Burhanpur, Abdurrahim Khanechanan. So it's mentioned especially, that he in the Masir Rahim that he threw the garden open to the public, and also the garden of the Taj Mahal. We know from European travelers, for instance, Bernier was obviously allowed into the garden because he describes it. So we don't get to know a lot in the sources, but from the occasional, passage, one can make out that to a certain extent the gardens were accessible. I don't think
Uh,
it was like in English country houses, which we know from Jane Austen, which we could be visited by visitors when their owners were not at home. But on the whole, one doesn't get to know too much. But it seems also the Agra was visited by, when the emperor was away, by foreign visitors. At least we get descriptions. Now the descriptions are always a bit of a problem, because they could be also, just copied from one source to the other. But obviously, to a certain extent, the buildings, the palaces, and probably also the gardens were accessible.
Professor Manvendra Kumar Pundhir has added something to what he had asked and the way you answered him.
Yeah,
He says that in the lower story, uh,
yeah.
bricks typically of the Akbari period have been used. I mean, he finds that there are certain bricks which belongs to the Akbari period, and that is why
Which
he
which
used.
which bill? Which bill?
I think I'll have to ask him. He doesn't specify.
Akbari bill. Akbari bill.
Uh, Probably one of the what he means is one of the beside mm,
Yeah.
Princess
No.
Jahanara.
I mean, I didn't dig into the ground, but what we see above ground, we have different formats of bricks in Mughal architecture, which allow us, which help also to date the building. So in Akbar's period, they were quite large, let's say 25 by 25 by 6 centimeters. So I'm thinking in in centimeters. And in Jahangir's time and Shah Jahan's time, they get successively smaller. So it would be something by 19, 12.5 by 2.5 centimeter. So this helps in the dating. So obviously, it's not impossible that the foundations, of the Jahanara Bach might be built on an earlier garden, even earlier than Mumtaz Mahal, uh, perhaps even dating from Babur's or Akbar's period. So most of the, obviously, since the gardens were not owned by the Mansabdars, say when a Mansabdar died or when he fell into disgrace, the garden would be given to another noble, and so the garden site changed hands repeatedly. And this is why we also get evidence from earlier periods, perhaps in the foundations. Yeah, but anyway, we can what we can see above ground in the Jahanara garden, I would say, dates from Jahangir's and from Shah Jahan's period, and obviously also there are later additions when the garden buildings were restored. Yeah,
But possibly there might be another reason for that. I mean, Professor
yeah,
Koch, you may correct me.
yeah,
Because this was a site where, from the period of Babur onwards, a number of structures had been built earlier as well. I mean, we know from Baburnama that when Babur comes to Agra, he found the eastern side to be barren, empty, uh, and I mean wild. So that is why Babu says that he had a number of structures built on the other side of the
yeah,
side where
yeah.
Jahanara's garden or these Aram Bagh and other are constructed. So it may also be possible that there was a reuse of material from the earlier structure. I mean, my impression would be that the bricks and the material from this area would not suddenly disappear. So when it is being refurbished or being re-given to some other person or being appropriated by someone, for example, we know it well that so-called Bagh-e-Noor Afshan was once upon a time a garden which was constructed during the period of Babur. That is one of the suspicions. So it's quite possible that whatever Professor Pundir might have found there may mean that there was a reuse of the building material. It may be one of the reasons. The other could be what you tried to explain. Whatever. There is, another question by Mr. Abdullah Raza.
Can I just add
Sure,
to
sure,
this?
sure,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
sure.
Because according to the Jaipur plan, yeah, the garden of Babur was right opposite the Taj Mahal. This
Hmm.
is yeah, it's called Chahar Bagh Badshahi. Then come next garden also Chahar Bagh Badshahi, And Babu also says he sat over the river, and to opposite the Agra fort, and was looking for a site for the garden, and found it difficult to find something which would correspond to his ideas how a garden should look like. I'm a bit skeptical about the Rambach being a foundation of Agra because of Babur, because the buildings as they stand today are from Jahangir's period. All right, the earlier foundation is possible, but the problem with the names of Babur's garden is they don't, besides the Charbach or the Bahe Hash Behisht, the other gardens like the Sarafshan garden, etc., it was not really possible to identify their sites. So the problem is a bit tricky. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, what's the other
yeah. I mean,
question?
the next question is by one of my students, Abdullah Raza,
Yeah.
who is working on the city of Agra based on its architectural remains. He is also quite skeptical when Aram Bagh or Ganur of Shah is identified as the uh, garden of Babar. Whatever. Now, his question is, thank you, ma'am, for such an informative lecture. My question is regarding the Bagh-e-Noor of Shah, which is nowadays popular as Rambagh. There is a popular view among the prominent scholars like uh, Catherine ASHA, Jonas Lehmerman, Arnath, and others that this was one of the first gardens at Agra built by Babur named Bagh-e-Gul Afshan. Although there are no proofs, as you rightly pointed out, in support of such claims. You yourself, in one of your articles, named notes on the painted and sculptural decorations of Jahangir's pavilion.
Yeah.
Where is it?
This came out in Facet of Indian Art.
Ah,
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. No,
uh,
I was dealing with the evidence I found in Jahangiri sources, yeah, where the garden is mentioned as Bahenur of Shan, and also the buildings which stand in the garden today on the riverfront terrace clearly date from Jahangir's period, and they have also wall paintings typical of Jahangir's period, showing angels and peris and birds, and so, yeah, this is certainly dating from Jahangir's period. Yeah. So, whether it was a foundation of Babur, I don't know whether excavations have been made because there's also a dekhana below the pavilions and looks also as if this would have been uh, built in Jahangir's period. So it's yeah. What is the evidence for the Gulaf Shan garden?
I mean, he wants to ask you whether it can be, labeled as an earlier garden by Babur.
I'm not too sure about it. So,
Naturally, naturally.
yeah, so it could be, but I think more. I really think one should do systematic excavation.
Shagupta, can you put up that question again? Abdullah Raza's question. Yeah, this is the question which he asked.
Yeah, but
Um,
I find it a bit difficult to read it because I have it only on my
uh, he says that there are no proofs for such a claim, and that you yourself, in your one of your papers, I don't know what he has written ahead of that because that is not visible here.
Yeah. My question is regarding the Bahinur of Shan, which is nowadays popular as Rambach. There's a popular way about.
You know.
No, no,
Ma'am,
I think we discussed this, no? So
Yeah, yeah.
it's not impossible that foundations are there from Babur's period, but the architectural evidence of the pavilions and the terrace clearly date from Jahangir's time. That's my view. Yeah.
Right.
Which I have explained in this article. I know also Mrs. Monaghan had an idea of that it was a a garden of Babur, and she even had the centenaries celebrations there. And I just feel it would need more evidence, yeah, that it was an earlier foundation. Because, as I said, we know that the gardens of Babur and his followers were opposite the Taj Mahal and around the bend of the river, because on the Jaipur plain they are still called Charbagh or Chaharbagh Badshahi, and while the regarding the nobility, a garden could pass from one hand to the other. The imperial gardens here would have remained in the family
Uh,
going back to Babur's time.
right, right, right. Now, I have got the full question. He has WhatsApped me, so I'll read out. You won't be able to read it there. Uh, he continues that you yourself, in one of your articles, name notes on the painted and sculptured
Yeah.
decorations of Noor Jahan's pavilion in Rambagh, argued that the garden belonged to Noor Jahan and there are no evidences to associate it with Babar, as the excavations conducted by ASI in 1976-77 clearly points that there were no layers of any structure. But in your book, The Complete Taj,
Hmm?
you associate the site with one of the early gardens of Babur.
I do.
In your article, you say that it is
Not
purely.
the Taj Mahal. I don't associate it with.
He says that the incomplete Taj you associate the site with one of the early gardens of Babur.
No, I don't think
Also,
so. What?
I don't remember seeing that. Uh,
I sort of, I sort of.
Also, I would like to point out that Jahangir in his memoirs mentions Bagh-e-Gul Afshan surviving in his reign and describes a small mosque attached to the garden. But
Yeah.
if you look at Bagh-e-Nur Afshan, there is no mosque attached to the garden. So,
Yeah,
what is
because
your
Gul Afshan is not Nur Afshan. It's a
right?
different garden. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is what he's
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a second question by him. Uh, Scholars interpret these garden spaces as expression of power, thus relate them to political importance, and the social and cultural importance of these structures are widely discussed as they serve multiple purposes in the form of pleasure gardens, residential gardens, and as funerary gardens. But do these gardens also have any economic significance, because we note that they were full of plantations? So, do you come across any evidence regarding the consumption of such huge produce for the local market, or were they exported?
Yeah, obviously, gardens had to be not only beautiful but also useful. And for the Taj Mahal garden, we know at least in the later periods, we don't get any evidence for the time of Shah Jahan. But that in the later periods, orange trees were planted in the garden and they were auctioned off. So you could sort of bid for the harvest of a year. So, but from the the problem is really, as I mentioned at the beginning, in the sources, especially the non-imperial gardens, we do not get so much information on them. One really has to piece the information together from various passages which occur in different places. So I haven't really come across any evidence for this being used for agricultural purposes. But obviously we had also fruit trees in the gardens, so something must have been, I mean, somehow the products must, but I don't have any evidence for any economic use.
Well,
But
But
obviously, that's a rich field, and one can do further research on it. And
right.
that would be an interesting topic, especially for Aligarh, in the tradition of Aligarh.
Uh, well, thank you very much for a very informative, beautiful lecture. As expected, well illustrated with some of the slides which are not popularly seen by people around here. Sometimes, in lectures which are given on architecture, we keep on seeing the same slides again and again.
Yeah,
But you had uh, such material which actually attracted our attention. Thank you very much. I know that there are certain things which one should really talk about while talking about the city of Agra. Uh,
yeah,
as I mean, probably Susan Gol and you both were the first to have written around that map of Agra, which is preserved in the city palace of Jaipur.
yeah.
It's a fascinating map.
It,
Uh,
it, it really is. Yeah,
uh,
and
you know, I have had the opportunity of very briefly seeing it once, but I also wanted to photograph certain parts of it, but was never given permission for that. But you reproduced some of the portions of that plan, especially the riverfront portion in your excellent book, The Complete Taj. Thank you very much for it. But still, I think it would be very nice if the other portions of the map, which are away from the riverfront, because they are also depicted there, if
yeah,
they will also be published so that they become available to everyone. For example, the portion where the Taksal, the mint, or the bazaars were
yeah,
located. They are there in the map, but we are unable to actually see the details. Chandramani Singh, as you probably
yeah,
are aware, did publish a two-volume work where she also, tried to decipher what was written in Hindavi on these
mm,
maps. She also tried to decipher what is written on this particular map. But because this book was published around 20, 30 years back, it was black and white, and the whole map had been, in fact, printed in small portions. So it really gets very difficult for the reader, even if one reads the name of a noble or someone, to relate it with the larger map where it is placed. So that becomes a difficulty, although Chandramani did a good job of trying to decipher each and every inscription which is given there.
Even today, the
Yeah,
Jaipur Palace Museum is using my overall photograph of the map, though, because since I saw it first, it has deteriorated also.
yeah,
And I was obviously, focusing on the riverfront and also on the survey in the field, which was quite a lot of work, but it would be extremely as important, as you point out, to look also into the other areas in
yeah.
the map too. So I mean, I can check, but my photographs focus mainly on the whole
Mainly on, yeah,
map
yeah.
and the riverfront buildings. But if it's of any help, I can check with my archive and my collection
Sure enough, sure
and
enough.
perhaps share with you some of this material.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the offer. I mean, the second thing which I would like to point out, and then if you could tell me whether I am correct or not, that although the city of Agra, as rightly you have also identified it as a city of gardens, with so many gardens out there. I referred some time back that Babarnama has a lot of information regarding the fact that when Agra was converted from a Lodi city to a Mughal city, a number of gardens were laid out, mostly on the riverfront side. Both the sides of the river were provided with gardens. As you also pointed out, that not only under Babur, but during the subsequent period, I don't know because I have no reference as far as the period of Akbar is concerned, but at least from Jahangir and Shah Jahan, once again a large number of gardens were laid out towards the river. But amongst all these gardens, some of which do survive, some of them have totally disappeared, are now only traceable on the old maps. There are only two which have been given some importance or some detailed study. For example, this garden of yours, the Bagh-e Jahanara. I mean, because of its bastions and because of the information which it contains, you wrote it. Before that, I mean, possibly Moynihan also tried to point out towards where this Bagh Jahanara is and whatnot. And the other, garden which has uh,
Moynihan didn't know about the Baha'u'llah.
but she names it, Bagh Jahanara. She
Yeah,
names it there, not knowing the exact location.
yeah, okay.
But at least it was mentioned by such works earlier, even before it was identified by you.
Mm.
It was being mentioned. But one of the gardens which has attracted much attention is the Bagh-e-Nur Afsha. You have written about the surface decorations, the angelic depictions, the Christian themes which are over there. Uh, why the other gardens have not been identified, and why so much importance has only been reserved, although in the map of Jaipur there are a number of gardens which are identified as Baghe Patisahi. No one is discussing them. Is it that the whole traces have disappeared, or what is the reason?
Yeah, Bahe Padishahi is a corrupted form of Bahe Badshahi. That it was an imperial garden. And yeah, the problem is, I mean, as you have seen, the gardens are going because those who are not which are not protected by the archaeological survey, are just, yeah, slowly waning. I mean, the fact that the Bahe Jahanara, yeah, was a nursery, kept the colonies from coming in. But as I mentioned at the end, in 2014, the lease, this is what the gardener told us, this was a 100-year-long lease, but it ended and it hasn't been extended. So it means now people, who live in these areas will seem to be just taking over. And this has certainly happened around the river bend and where between the Mechtabach and then we have the bend of the river. So all these gardens are gone. Even of Barber's garden, only a well is preserved, and then this one monument called Gyara Sidi. So yeah, I really wish that that the historical landscape of Agra, would receive greater interest, and would at least what is left would be preserved. So
Any remains of gardens which are not besides the river but are situated in the interior?
Yeah, there is this garden of Jahangir, who has been converted into a dargah. I forgot
Okay.
the name now, yeah, but very little is left, especially on the Jamna comes from Delhi, so it flows,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
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 So on the right side, most of the gardens are gone. We have these two chhatris which are built in and built over by later houses also of the British period, and yes, the garden of Darashukho, which was not far from the fort. Now a school is on this side. I have shown this. And also the Aurangzeb's Haveli. This is the Mubarak Manzil. This is preserved to a certain extent, but a pietra dura atelier is in it. So I have obviously perhaps one could find more traces built over by other houses, but the best preserved, and I think this was uh, because it was on the other side of the river, and so the garden character has been longer preserved on the left bank of the river. And also the imperial gardens were there, so they were obviously considered of more importance. Yeah.
Well, it's been almost 2 hours with you, 1 hour, 51 minutes. Thank you very much for taking out time, such a long time for us. Uh, we are really very, very grateful to you. I wish, I hope that this pandemic would soon be over and it would be possible for us not only to meet virtually but face to face. Once again, I take this opportunity to once again invite you to come to Aligarh, and you had promised to give a lecture to us. I am trying to uh, let the flag of architecture flying at Aligarh. So I hope you will come and help us in this endeavor. Now we have at least 2 or 3 persons at Aligarh who are working on a theme which once you said was not being taken up by Aligarh School. Architecture is now very much part of the Aligarh curriculum. Not only that, it is being offered by a large number of students in BA and MA, but there are a number of scholars who are actually working on themes which are related with architecture at Aligarh. Now, two of our students who worked on such themes joined this session today. Ms. Lubna Irfan, who has just submitted her thesis on public structures, and Abdullah Raza, who is working not actually on architecture as such, but on the city of Agra based on the architectural remains. And then we have Professor Manvendra Kumar Pundhir, who has not only been teaching the architecture of the ancient period at Aligarh, but he has also taken up from me the course which is on Mughals and the Sultanate period. And under him also, there are a number of students who are working in architecture. So there was, your complaint, which was there, say, 20 years back, that Aligarh was lagging. Now we are trying to, bridge that gap, and I hope that scholars like you would keep writing, because it is the works of you which inspires us to keep on studying architecture. Believe me, the earlier works, they are remarkable works. Percy Brown is irreplaceable, but cannot attract new students. It is you and ASHA and others who really inspire us. And I really thank you for everything. And I hope that this, interaction between us would also continue in the future. Now, all those who are tuned in to listen to this program, let me announce the program for the next week. Next week, that is on 18th of December, that is Friday, we have Dan Sheffield, and he would be speaking on comparative religion in early modern India, the school of doctrines, that is Dabistan-e Mazahib, in historical perspective. So he will be giving a lecture under our series on the sources for the study of medieval period. The second lecture, which will be on Sunday, is by a scholar, Dr. Sajjad Rizvi from University of Exeter, scheduled for 20th of December. Transnational Shi networks before colonialism. So these are the two lectures for the coming week, 18th Friday and 20th, that is Sunday. In this month of December, we will have two other lectures, but those lectures I would announce next week. So thank you, all of you, for joining here with us. Thank you, Dr. Koch, once again, and hope that audience, you would keep on joining us and listening to these lectures, not only listening, but trying to follow the spirit which is behind them, and that is that our past was not as acrimonious as it appears today. We lived like a normal society. We lived together very happily, and there were clashes, but there were also points where we collaborated with each other. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yeah.